Good afternoon, everybody. This is Greg Cook, the Deputy Chief of the Policy and Licensing Division of the FCC's Homeland Security and Public Safety Bureau. I'm here with Wade Whitmer, the Deputy Program Director for FEMA's IPAWS, and we're going to be starting our webinar on emergency alerting. Thank you all for joining us. It is a capacity crowd today, and we're very excited that all of you are participating in this important topic. And right now I'm trying to get my slides to progress. And here we go. Alerting is a priority to the FCC's and FEMA's mission. It's integrated into our enabling statute and is also integrated into United States national policy that ensures that under all conditions the President can communicate with the American people. It went backwards. Let's try this again. There we go. There are two major alerting systems that are regulated by the Federal Communications Commission. The first one, the Emergency Alert System, or EAS, is a national public warning system that's commonly used by state and local authorities to deliver important emergency information such as weather and amber alerts to affected communities. EAS participants are radio, television, cable, satellite radio, and television providers, and also wireline video providers such as AT&T's UVerse and Fios. These deliver local alerts on a voluntary basis, but all are required to provide the capability for the President to address the public during a national emergency. Wireless emergency alerts are a more recent system that deliver critical warnings and information to the public on their wireless devices. Participation by wireless providers is voluntary, but those that offer the service, and most do, must adhere to the technical and operational requirements established by the Federal Communications Commission. Before we get into the description of the individual alerting systems, let's talk a little bit about the basic alerting model. Pretty much all alerting systems follow this model, and as we talk further and as you hear from Wade talking about how the integrated public alert and warning system is structured, you're going to see more complex versions of this chart. Alerts are initiated by trusted sources, are then delivered over commercial communications infrastructure to the public. Both the EAS and wireless emergency alerts follow this approach. But what are trusted sources? Well, the President of the United States is a trusted source. The National Weather Service is the trusted source that delivers the vast, vast majority of emergency alerts that any of us receive. But similarly, state, local, county governments are trusted sources, whether through their emergency management agencies or state police. And another common trusted source is the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMEC, that delivers Amber Alerts. So for those among you who are at state and county local government, the question is, well, how do I become a trusted source? And Wade is going to go into this in a tremendous amount of detail in terms of the training that's available and authorization. But just for a quick overview, you have to understand the alerting systems that are available to you. I mean, we talked about the two that the FCC regulates, the WEA and the EAS. You need to get training and authorization from FEMA. Wade will go into this more deeply later. You also need to work with your fellow local alerting stakeholders. So, for example, in each state, there is a State Emergency Communications Committee, or SECC, which is a volunteer organization that administers the EAS at the state and local level. This entity organizes all of the local radio and television broadcasts and works with the National Weather Service to make sure that EAS alerts are delivered locally. So being able to communicate with them in your proceedings for initiating or stopping an alert or dealing with a false alert is really essential. The way to do that is to get familiar with your state EAS plan. State EAS plans describe state and local EAS operation and contain guidelines which must be followed to activate the EAS. There's a URL for you, as well as contain procedures and other things that will let you know how EAS operates in your particular state. The other way is to really participate in the IPAWS team and testing lab. There's the website for that. Wade will go into greater detail with that, but it is a way to really develop alert initiator proficiency. And finally, get to know and work with the local coordination meteorologists from the National Weather Service. They're just like local broadcasters, except that they're the folks who will initiate the weather alerts that would ultimately be delivered through EAS and WEA. So let's talk a little bit about the EAS. First, the rules. The rules can be found in the Code of Federal Regulations at 47 CFR 11.1 at sequence. And these are the rules that must be followed by all EAS participants, as we said, radio, TV, cable, direct broadcast, satellite, etc. EAS participants must deliver the presidential alert and nationwide monthly and weekly tests. This is required. Delivery of other alerts, whether it's weather alerts or any kind of state-based alert or an Amber Alert, is voluntary. The rules also require that these alerts, which must be delivered in an audio and visual fashion, must be accessible to people with disabilities. So how are EAS alerts distributed? They're delivered to EAS participants either over the internet from the IPAWS gateway or by over-the-air broadcast. We'll describe these in a little bit more detail soon. EAS participants are required to monitor both systems for redundancy, but the EAS alerts that are received through IPAWS offer digital sound, enhanced text, at least the potential for non-English alerts, potential for multimedia and URL. So there's more data there for you to then rebroadcast to your public. Let's talk a little bit about IPAWS. Now this looks a little complicated, and Wade will get into it in more detail, but this is exactly the same as that trusted model, commercial communication structure, public chart that I showed you earlier, that the alerting authorities on the left, your local, state, territorial, etc., alerting authorities, these are your trusted sources. The middle piece, IPAWS Open, alerting disseminators, are your commercial distribution structure. And then all the way on the right are the American people, who are the public, who receive these alerts over the EAS, over WEA, or through NOAA if you have NOAA weather radios. Here's another way to look at the broadcast piece of this. Rather than every one of the EAS participants, and by the way, there are over 24,000 EAS participants in the country, that is over 20,000 broadcasters, and then over 4,000, maybe 5,000 cable facilities that deliver alerts to the public. So coordinating them is complicated, and again, that becomes the job of the SECC. In each state, there is at least one PEP, or primary entry point, and that is a large radio station that is connected directly through FEMA to the president. And this would be the station that would be used should the president wish to deliver an alert to the American public. The PEP station, and I think, Wade, there are like 74 of these. There are 74 in the country right now, delivers the initial EAS to the public. The PEPs alone reach 90% of the population. And when they deliver that alert, it's the EAS sound that we're all used to hearing. It is that long tone followed by this Well, that 3 duck squawky bursts is a data burst. And what happens when it broadcasts that data burst is that not only do the public hear it, but a number of stations called local primaries, or LP1s, around the country, and there are probably 550 LP areas in the country, listen to their local primary entry point. Equipment at that station hears those squawks, interprets it as a code to then trigger its equipment to rebroadcast the alert to the public. The LP1s, in turn, are monitored by all of the other TV and radio stations, uplinks to direct broadcast satellite, as well as cable headends, to ensure that as this message trickles down through the system, that everybody in the listening and viewing area will be able to get the message. Further, because there are so many involved, and because it is somewhat redundant, is that there's a level of resilience that it pretty well will ensure that some station or stations will be able to rebroadcast the alert in the event of a national emergency. Let's talk a little bit about recent Commission actions on EAS. The Commission recently adopted the Emergency Alert Reliability Order and further notice. And in the report and order, the Commission adopted requirements for performing what are known as live code tests. And live code tests are local, state or local EAS tests that use actual EAS alert code, such as a tornado code, as opposed to a test code, to train communities in how to respond to actual alerts and to increase the proficiency of the alert originators. Now, one of the conditions in the order is that these tests can be used by a local initiator, but that significant outreach must be done both to the public, but to other emergency managers, particularly public safety answering points in 911, to ensure that these do bring value as public safety exercises and don't cause public confusion. The Commission also adopted requirements that permit EAS participants to deliver public service announcements that use the EAS attention signal, that two-toned audio signal, and a simulation of their header codes. Now, in this case, the simulation will sound exactly like an EAS alert, but will contain no data, so that the broadcast of a PSA on TV or radio will not trigger downstream equipment. The order also helps to prevent false alerts by requiring that EAS participants configure their EAS equipment to reject common alerting protocol-based alerts. This is the language that is used for IPAWS, and Wade can get into that a little bit further. But to reject those common alerting protocol-based alerts that contain an invalid digital signature, as well as to reject legacy, like the broadcast daisy chain-based alerts, whose expiration time falls outside of specific time limits. Finally, the order requires EAS participant to email the Federal Communications Commission's 24/7, 365 Operations Center within 24 hours of its discovery that it has sent a false alert. The Commission also released a further notice of proposed rulemaking along with the report and order, and in this document, the Commission seeks further comment on whether there is a need for additional false alert and or lockout reporting beyond that required by the order that I just described, and also proposes that the EAS rules should be revised to require that state EAS plans to include procedures for preventing and correcting false alerts. Other recent activities by the Commission with regard to EAS are the automating of state EAS plans. The Commission has adopted rules that create a new, streamlined electronic system for the filing of state EAS plans, which previously had been filed in paper. And this streamlined electronic system will increase the effectiveness and efficiency of the EAS while reducing the burdens on stakeholders. The Commission also adopted 2 new EAS codes that will allow state and local authorities, or new EAS category that will allow state and local authorities to notify the public of threats to law enforcement and to help apprehend dangerous suspects. This new code and category called Blue Alerts has put in a new EAS event code. The EAS uses event codes such as TOR for tornado, for example. This one will be BLU, will be used to warn the public when a law enforcement officer is missing, seriously injured, or killed in the line of duty, or when the officer is subject to an imminent credible threat. Blue alerts must be implemented for EAS by January 19th, 2019, and must be implemented for WEA by July 19th, 2019. So let's talk a bit about wireless emergency alerts. The rules that regulate wireless emergency alerts can be found at 47 CFR sections 10.1 at sequence. Wireless alerts, emergency alerts, or WEAs, were also established pursuant to the Warning Alert and Response Network Act, or the WARN Act. They are sent out strictly using the IPAWS architecture. There's no legacy daisy chain analog for WEA. And there are 3 categories of WEA alerts: a presidential alert, an imminent threat, and an amber alert. The presidential is the alert from the president. The amber alert is an alert that goes out under the specific Amber Alert guidelines, and an imminent threat alert is an alert that can be any event that corresponds to the imminence, the urgency, and the severity in the common alerting protocol. So a tornado that's about to strike would be an imminent threat, whereas a hurricane, as serious as it is 3 days out, might not be. On the other hand, the storm surge from the hurricane, which is about to hit in 20 minutes, would be. So let's talk a little bit about the WEA architecture. WEA architecture, again, follows that same basic model. You have the trusted sources on the left, your federal agencies, your local emergency operations center, your state emergency operations center. going through FEMA's alert aggregator and alert gateway, which is basically the IPAWS system, through commercial mobile service provider gateways to the mobile device to the public. Recent Commission actions regarding WEA are improved geotargeting. When WEAs were initially adopted, the alerts were were required to go no further than a state. But because alerts are local and reach specific areas, the Commission has been improving geotargeting so that alerts reach the communities that are affected by an emergency without disturbing others. So currently, participating wireless providers are required to best approximate the area to be alerted. But by November of 2019, participating wireless providers will be required to match the area where the alert is within 1/10 of a mile. Similarly, the Commission has adopted rules to improve alert message content by requiring active URLs, clickable links that would take you to a website or a telephone number. So national wireless providers are currently required to support active links. Regional providers will be required to support links by May 1st, 2019. The URLs were used quite successfully last December by the Emergency Operations Center in Ventura County to have a link that informed folks affected by the wildfires in Southern California to find evacuation centers and emergency supplies. Message length, which had, for technological reasons, been limited to 90 characters, will increase to 360 characters by May 1st of 2019. Further, participating wireless providers must support Spanish language alerts by May 1st, 2019. Now, as Wade will describe, more and more local communities want to be initiators of WEA alerts, and to ensure that they would be happy that the alert lands where it's supposed to, the Commission adopted rules that allowed WEA end-to-end testing to begin on May 1st, 2019. But in the interim, some waivers has been granted to permit end-to-end WEA tests prior to May 1st, 2019. For example, to the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments conducted a WEA test in April, and as we see, FEMA will be conducting a nationwide WEA test in September. So in the further notice of proposed rulemaking, there are certain WEA questions asked as well. The FNPRM notes that the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau's report on the Hawaii false alert indicated that some wireless subscribers did not receive WEA false alert and subsequent correction. Similarly, press reports from some of the recent WEA tests have indicated that some subscribers did not receive WEA test messages. So the Commission is seeking comment on factors such as network distribution issues that might delay or prevent delivery of WEA alerts to members of the public. The FNPRM also seeks comment on whether, and if so how, the Commission should take measures to address inconsistent WEA delivery. For example, should the Commission adopt technical standards or benchmarks for WEA performance and delivery? The Commission has conducted has conducted so far 3 nationwide EAS tests. The first one in 2011, second one in 2016, the third in 2017. And that most recent one in 2017 was conducted to assess the reliability of the EAS with an emphasis on testing the IPAWS and to allow the Commission to evaluate improvements. The Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau released its full report on April 13th of this year. And overall, the 2017 test demonstrated that IPAWS continues to deliver high-quality, effective, and accessible EAS alerts. However, test data also reveal technical impediments to full reception of EAS alerts effectively over IPAWS, and that some interference with closed captioning and other practices impeded full accessibility to the test. The Commission, FEMA, in coordination with the Commission, will be conducting a new nationwide EAS and WEA test on September 20th, 2018. So on September 2018 at 2:18 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, FEMA, using the presidential classification, will send a WEA test message to WEA-capable wireless devices throughout the entire United States. Shortly thereafter, at 2:20 p.m., FEMA will conduct a live test of the EAS which will be disseminated via the Integrated Public Alert and Warning System. The Commission has released an order granting a waiver to FEMA to conduct the EAS portion of the test and a public notice announcing the details of the combined test to the public. EAS participants are reminded they are required to file with the ETRS, or the EAS Test Reporting System, as follows. They must complete Form 1 on or before August 27, 2018. They must file Form 2 data on or before 11:59 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time on September 20th, and then they must file Form 3 with the details of their test results on or before November 5th, 2018. On January 13th, 2018, the State of Hawaii Emergency Management Agency mistakenly sent a false ballistic missile alert using the EAS and WIA. The FCC's Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau investigated the event and released a report with recommendations to guard against and mitigate against future false alerts. And there's the link for that. That'll be available on the Public Safety Bureau's website next week. But among the recommendations are that all stakeholders should establish redundant and effective lines of communication with key stakeholders during emergencies, that entities that conduct tests should do internal tests in a controlled and closed environment, such as FEMA's IPAWS test lab. Tests should require more than one credentialed person to validate the message content prior to transmission of a high-impact alert, as well as all tests. Alert initiators should implement specific upgrades to alerting software and to develop standard operating procedures for responding to false alerts. And finally, the alert managers, alert initiators should consult with their SECCs on a regular basis, at least annually, to ensure that EAS procedures, including initiation and cancellation of actual alerts and tests, are mutually understood, agreed upon, and documented in the state EAS plan. The Commission and the Bureau have also continued to conduct public outreach to inform stakeholders such as yourselves of developments and best practices for emergency alerting. On May 15, 2018, the Bureau hosted a public roundtable with stakeholders to share lessons learned from Hawaii and other issues and to promote a continued dialogue. And among the recommendations and major takeaways are that stakeholders engage in proficiency training and adopt best practices for alerts and tests, that building local relationships is essential, that stakeholders, including SECCs and state emergency managers, should meet on a regular basis, that state personnel responsible for initiating alerts should take the training offered by FEMA and practice using the FEMA IPAWS lab, which can be accessed online. An archived webcast of the roundtable can be viewed here. The Commission and the Public Safety Bureau and Homeland Security Bureau will continue to conduct outreach and work together with government and industry stakeholders. Thank you. Now, before I turn this over to Wade, please, if you have any questions, please email them to pld@fcc.gov. We will be reviewing these and we'll answer them to the extent we have time at the end of the webinar. You'll also see an IPAWS email address as Wade does his presentation. You can certainly email your FEMA-oriented questions to Wade, but if you want to try to get them answered today, please also send them to pld@fcc.gov. Thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you very much, Greg, and thank you very much to the FCC, FEMA, and the FCC. We're critical partners in continuing to really make alert and warning more capable and available to authorities across the entire United States. So I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you all today. Today I'm going to cover 4 large topic areas. I'm going to talk about the IPAWS program, and then about how the IPAWS works a little more on the technical side, and how alerting authorities can get online to make use of the IPAWS capabilities that are there, and then best practices, a little bit more about the lab and testing and training. I just want to reiterate that the importance of us making this capability available, public warning and emergency information is a key capability for fulfilling the core government function to protect and serve people, especially during emergencies. And with that, let me talk about the IPAWS program. We in the FEMA IPAWS program are focused completely on the business of ensuring that there's a capability in place, number one, for the president to warn the people in the United States if ever there is or an urgent threat to the nation. The decision would be made to that a message is urgent and needs to go out. But also, and all those general requirements really starting with the Communications Act in 1934, and then also the requirements for FEMA to conduct this business are in the IPAWS Modernization Act, Public Law 114-143, in Executive Order 13407, and in the Stafford Act, in particular Section 202, disaster warnings. Throughout all of those documents that I just mentioned, it's also made apparent and a requirement that FEMA make those capabilities available to states and locals to use for when the president is not using it, and to provide assistance to states to ensure that effective warning, disaster warnings are provided to local populations, especially during local emergencies. So with that, the IPAWS system, the capability that is in place today, allows authorities at all levels of government to access through the IPAWS services and deliver messages to the private sector, the emergency alert system, radio, television, cable, satellite, and etc., and to cell phones as wireless emergency alerts. We also have some capabilities with NOAA to be able to push alerts over no weather radios, and then with internet providers or internet services and applications as we move on. Our responsibility in FEMA is that we are building and operating that IPAWS system that's in the middle and the gateway interfaces, that we administer the users of the system in a coordination and in application with the states and the local authorities and policies that are in that area, and that we continue to work with the FCC and the private sector to continually enhance and deliver new warning capabilities in partnership, especially with the private sector. Today, in addition to the president, FEMA's IPAWS is being leveraged by more than 1,000 agencies across the country, including agencies in Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, and the District of Columbia. If this map were to show the states that have access to IPAWS at the time, today, the whole map would be green. What you're seeing there is a snapshot of counties that have at least one local authority in place to be able to use the IPAWS. Today, more than 66% of the population is covered by, is living in a county that has at least one local authority that has access to leverage those IPAWS capabilities. In 2017, we looked at the usage of IPAWS and realized that across the number of users that we had at that time, that only about 10%, actually less than 10%, had ever used the system during an emergency. And that began, with that, we began to seek feedback from the authorities, and we conducted some interviews, and were found across kind of the user base at that time a lot of challenges and some consistent challenges. A large number of the users had concerns with governance, the local governance and usage in their area. There was a lack of understanding on how they could get messages out through IPAWS to cell phones and radio and TV. There's a fear of failure that we attributed a lot to a lack of training and actual practice using the system. Of the 10 to 20% that had actually used the IPAWS system at that time, we realized, looking back, that a lot of them had an issue or had a problem in getting messages to move from their local systems through IPAWS into the public on that first try, resulting in a lot of calls to help to us in the FEMA IPAWS office. Quick look at numbers, some numbers, and this is to give you an idea of the number of messages that are moving through the system on an average and on a daily basis. These numbers that are presented here are all actually since 2012, beginning in April 2012. which is when the IPAWS wireless emergency alert capability came online. So that first set of numbers there, starting with about 37,000 alerts to cell phones as wireless emergency alerts have been sent since April of 2012. NOAA is by far and large the most common and frequent user of that capability. The majority of that 35,000 alerts sent to cell phones from the Weather Service are flash flood warnings, followed by tornado warnings, and then I think dust storm warnings. The Weather Service does not send all of their weather products to cell phones. They self-selected down to 7 warning types. So they only send their 7 most severe weather warnings to the wireless emergency alert capability. And that local number has mostly come, about 950, 958 usages by local or state authorities has mostly come in the last couple of years. The second set of numbers is what we see through the IPAWS system to activate the emergency alert system, radio and television messages in a local area. It should be noted that not all, matter of fact, probably maybe even a majority of EAS activations do not necessarily come through the IPAWS system. EAS can be activated at the local level, either directly with the station or through individual local and state connections that they have into their EAS. In fact, NOAA today is not distributing any of their weather messages via the IPAWS EAS feed, so their numbers are not counted in there either. Increasingly, we have seen local usage of activating EAS through IPAWS. Most common today, which we are happy to see, is use of IPAWS to activate local required weekly tests and also required monthly tests through the system of EAS through the system. The 3 million number down there at the bottom, by far and large, mostly do not go to the public. The National Weather Service does send all of their weather-related product warnings, advisories, and statements via IPAWS. They are posted to a public feed, but they are not directed out of to the systems such as Wireless Emergency Alert and the EAS that would interrupt or be displayed to the public. More on that, I mentioned the local usage has been increasing, especially over the last 2 years, specifically for wireless emergency alerts. In fact, it's been almost double year over year since 2016. We feel that there's 2 key factors that are influencing that local uptake and usage of the system. One is a growing realization of the effectiveness and the ability of that cell phone alert to get a lot of people's attention very fast. Wireless emergency alerts can be disruptive. They are disruptive, which is good when you need a public's attention to tell them about an emergency situation that is developing very rapidly. The second factor that we are seeing is public expectation has almost done a reversal, probably starting around the end of 2014 and the beginning of 2015, when some initial local usage began, and as the public got more and more used to alerts being delivered to their cell phone with that startling tone that Greg mentioned earlier. So what we are seeing now is, instead of generally being annoyed by say a flash flood warning or an amber message, the public has begun to question why local authorities have not used wireless emergency alerts when there is an emergency situation in their area. And we in the IPAWS office have been trying to keep up since. To that point, I'll mention some initiatives. With the increased usage of IPAWS, these initiatives I'm displaying on the screen are things that we are using to keep up with the learning curve of state and local authorities on leveraging these services to provide emergency warnings to the public. I mentioned our IPAWS office analysis that we had done in early 2007, and that the users, primarily locals and states, had highlighted a need for more training and assistance in the use of the capability. My original expectations in the program were that we would largely see training and uptake by the vendor community that supports usage, that supports the interface from the locals into the IPAWS system to leverage those capabilities. That has not necessarily been the case, and it's something that we are working with through both engagement with the local authorities as much as possible and engagement with the vendor tools that are the interface from authorities that want to send messages into the IPAWS. In addition to working directly with the vendors to provide them some hints and guidance and notes back from their users, we're also revamping the IPAWS specific training courses that are available on FEMA's Emergency Management Institute website for anyone to take. We have increased our outreach and doing briefings at regional, state, and local conferences where we talk about issues and how to solve them, effective best practices for public alert warning, and conducting training and exercises. In addition to just redoing the IPAWS courses, we're also looking across the FEMA Emergency Management Institute course catalog and other programs to include the National National Exercise Division and other places where we can insert public alert warning practice and training and exercising into the FEMA's National Incident Management System framework. We also have just recently launched a federal website that is a closed group. It's a place where we're only opening it to users, so registered authorities of the IPAWS, to use the IPAWS system, where they can engage in sharing peer-to-peer experience, discussion, insights with particular software tools, and local practices, standard operating procedures, and lesson learned, so that they can engage with each other to help each other learn to the best effectively alert and warn the public. So moving on to my next topic, how does the IPAWS work? I'm going to give a little bit of a technical description on how messages get from a public safety official to people that are in a danger zone of a local emergency situation. But first, I want to talk a little bit about all of the other methods, or the methods that are commonly used today to communicate with the public across all spheres, from public safety officials to the public. The IPAWS capability is only a small part or only one method in this large toolbox that authorities have to choose from when they're communicating with the public. And so what you see on this chart here is, on the left side is the general method, and I'll run down them quickly for you. Social media, which is commonly talked about, text messaging and email, ringing people's telephones, using the agency website, and local media coverage. Those are all tools or methods that require people to actively be seeking information or to have pre-registered to receive information from a particular authority via that method. In addition, emergency officials commonly will use, in dire emergencies, door-to-door, where they're actually sending their personnel out to knock on doors, sometimes in very dangerous situations. And then there are communities that have sirens or use mobile loudspeakers. On the right side of this diagram, what I've done is list just some considerations and comments for thinking about an authority to think about when they are trying to communicate with the public in an emergency. The amount of time that you have to put your message out is kind of key, and it has an impact, and it has a different response depending on which of these methods you're using. So speaking to social media, it's very important to understand who's following you. And not only is it common where I'll find a local emergency manager who says, everybody is following me on Facebook, but when they send out a message, they don't find that people get it till after the emergency has happened. Things to consider about any of these social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and etc., is that if you aren't actively pushing information out frequently that people are interacting with by either commenting on your post or liking your post, your messages may fall off their feed. And another thing to consider is that a lot of folks do not actively have notifications turned on for their social media feeds. So they check it twice, 3, 4 times a day, but they may not have a message delivered to them via social media in an urgent situation. Text message and email is similar. Text messages typically are beeping into people's phones. Some people do not check their email as frequently as they do their text messages. But how current are their phone numbers in your database? And it's also important to understand that, especially during times of high usage in a small localized area, that network congestion in that local area can delay delivery of both text messages and people's access to their emails. The same thing can happen with telephone. So telephone reverse dialers, can easily, even though the tools that an authority has access to send out a telephone message can dump many messages into the network at one time, the local networks, your local telephone infrastructure's ability to single-handedly dial, or multiple dialers dial each phone number in succession and deliver a voice message or recorded message can take quite a bit of time. So then we just slip back down to IPAWS. IPAWS for very urgent notification, especially in urgent emergencies, and I'm going to talk mostly to the wireless emergency alerts and to the emergency alert system, the EAS today, are truly location-based. These are capabilities that people do not have to actively sign up for. They don't have to actively be seeking information. They are tools that can push information to people within a general geographic area. So Greg showed us the IPAWS architecture and the general format, where you have authorities on one side, on the left side of this diagram, the FEMA gateway systems in the middle that relay and pass those messages to our partners in the private sector that have and maintain communication systems that actually talk to people. The emergency alert system, the wireless emergency alerts, National Weather Services systems, and then of course the internet are the pieces that are online today. I will talk more about NOAA in a little bit. There are some things that we are continuing to work with NOAA to bring back online. And I'm generally going to talk first about the authorities on how do they interact with IPAWS. So IPAWS does not build a front-end application that we provide to the alerting authorities or the users of the system. We are partnered with the private sector that produces tools that are used by the alerting authorities. So the tools that are in the offices and the emergency operations centers of public safety officials, emergency dispatch officials, the emergency management people, your 911 call centers, and etc. Today, there are more than 40 tools in use across that 1,000 plus user base that are leveraging IPAWS. The logos that I've thrown up on this slide only represent about half of that diverse set of products. That presents some challenges and opportunities. That diversity of products is there because it responds to the diversity of the local agencies and offices, individual and operational points that have responsibility for sending alerts to the public. They can be in multiple different areas and different functional sets within a particular agency. The challenge that provides opportunity. So whoever's desk it is that has responsibility for sending the alerts, there's likely already a product at his disposal that can interoperate with IPAWS. The challenge is that each of those tools is very different on the interface side. So training and common standard operating procedures across those tools are very different. Again, I mentioned that we've been reaching out to the vendors, and in November of 2017, we actually kicked off a feedback session with and invited vendors where we gave a briefing on common problems that we are hearing or issues we're hearing from their users with their tools, and recommendations on how to improve that and to make the system and to make mistakes less common and make the system easier and more effective to be used by local authorities. FEMA, we're the little part in the middle on the system side, even though we find ourselves as responsible for end-to-end, the actual connections and wires that we build are the littlest part of the system. The FEMA alert aggregator. The FEMA alert aggregator is the piece in the middle that serves as a gateway between agencies that are authorized in accordance with their state and local, territorial, and tribal policies to send alerts and emergency messages to the people within a jurisdiction, and then the private sector systems that can actually connect messages to people, aka radio, television in the EAS, cell phones as wireless emergency alerts, NOAA weather radios, and internet applications. The IPAWS Open has a profile, contains a profile that we fill in during the application process for each of those agencies. Using a digital certificate to authenticate the message as they come in the front and ensure that the message has the integrity of that message and the authentication of the person who sent it. The iPause Open then compares the message characteristics each time against that profile, ensuring that the alerting authority's message is in accordance with the policy and the request that were approved on their application when they became a registered user of the system. So, for instance, one of the checks that the iPause Open, and this all happens automatically, there is no FEMA people in the middle of this process when a message is sent. So the system will inspect the geographic alerting area that the alert message is asked to be targeted to ensure that it is not outside of the geographical jurisdiction of the authority that sent that message. So iPause Open is the gateway, attaching primarily today to the emergency alert system, the wireless emergency alerts, no weather radio as soon as we can get them back online, and of course some internet services that are out there today. A key common factor amongst EAS, WEA, and no weather radio is the broadcast function. That's key in that that means that we are delivering alerts to an area, to anybody who's within the area of the broadcast footprints of those systems, regardless of where those people may be from, whether they are visiting or live in that area. We are not based, none of the iPause services are based on people signing up. There are no databases within the iPause system that track people's addresses, phone numbers, zip codes, etc. We don't know who the messages go to. We just deliver them to a geographic area. The emergency alert system, first up, it is the key iPause connection. It's the longest standing public alert and warning system in the nation. And just as Greg already covered some of this, but I will mention that all radio, television, cable, wireless, satellite systems providers out there are connected and monitoring the iPause in addition to listening to over-the-air messages in accordance with their local and state EAS plans, which works via audio relay that Greg described earlier. Each station's device is also pinging to iPause and looking for or requesting any current messages that are relevant to their geographic audience and in accordance with their station's local policies. While the over-the-air relay only today passes a minimal amount of information about the message originator and header information and the audio content of the message, the messages sent to EAS stations via iPause can supply additional robust information and higher quality digital attachments that the devices within those stations can choose to pull down and create that message that goes over the air, that is broadcast to their listeners. However, their stations are not necessarily required to use the information that comes through that iPause message, or for that matter, even required to play any federal, state, territorial, tribal, or local messages that are originated. Although most stations do. Almost all stations support the particular messages you may be used to hearing would be tornado warnings and flash floods and local emergency messages in coordination with that local authority. But let me foot stomp again. As a local authority, and I encourage stations to reach out to your local public safety offices and agencies also, is that it requires coordination and partnership to work effectively. EA, and another key thing, especially for authorities that do use EAS, is to recall and to remember that in accordance with the way those devices operate today, when you send an EAS message, it only activates that device and plays that message once on your local radio, television, and cable systems. That message for a local authority can be no longer than 2 minutes long. How that message is displayed and aired changes from station to station. It's important for you to understand how fast and how your stations will play your message and display it on the television screens. So the coordination is key, and I encourage it to happen both ways for the authorities that plan to use to deliver to the public via EAS, that you reach out to your local stations and partner with them, and also for the local stations to reach out to the authorities in your area. So wireless emergency alerts, the newest capability today in alert and warning is that wireless emergency alerts. Some key technical and attributes and limitations of the system as it is implemented today are that it is a cell broadcast technology. It is key that it gets that broadcast is sent from a cell tower to any cell phone that is registered and using that tower at the time. Because it is a broadcast, it is not a directed communication to each individual cell phone within that area. It is not impacted by congestion in the local cellular network. So when you are at a football game and it's taking hours for your text messages to go and be returned back to you, cell broadcast cuts across all of that, uses effectively a different channel to push a message into your phone. So it's not subscription based. There is no place for citizens to go sign up to be able to receive wireless emergency alerts. It is delivered as a capability built into the cell phones when you get one. However, people can opt out. There are settings. If you move through the settings within your phone, you'll find an area that pertains to emergency alerts or government alerts that allows the individual to opt out of being notified of those alerts when they're broadcast from a cell tower in their area. They will not display on the phone, or the phone will not activate when an alert is broadcast if that user has been opted out. Today, it's only a 90-character message that is provided. As Greg mentioned, you can send a link. Some phones, or most phones, will recognize that link. Here's the example of the Ventura County message that was sent last fall. So in this particular phone, the phone realized that format as a link, and people were actually able to touch that link within the emergency alert message and be taken directly to that web page. Not all phones today will do that. It is in progress as they are rolling that out to newer phones, or as phones are upgraded, that they will be able to recognize links. And there may be some network areas of the country that deliver messages a bit differently, and that the link is not able to be recognized at the phone. It will still be in the text, and somebody can read it and type it in. So the emergency alerts also can be geo-targeted. Originally, in the very early part, in the early days of 2012 and 2013, some of the wireless emergency alert carriers were delivering messages only to the county. Since about late 2013 and 2014, all of the major carriers begin targeting to, if there's a targeted area provided with the wireless emergency alert message that was drawn by the originating authority, then they do make their best attempt to target it only to the cell towers that are within or near that geo-targeted area. These are examples of the message target areas that were sent and messages that were sent. Authorities quickly learned that their alert typically and almost always will spill outside of the actual area that they had targeted it to. So they quickly learned that the most effective response was to put location-specific information into the text for the people that got that. As an example, there in the top left corner is an emergency message that was sent by the Los Angeles Police Department. They actually included the actual address of the block area where the incident was occurring within their message. They directed the message to only be, they intended the message to only be sent to about a mile in diameter circular area. They experienced that message did go a few miles outside of the area that they intended, but with the actual address information in there, residents or people who received it outside the area gained awareness, but were able to identify quickly that it was not specifically for them, and that drives the annoyance factor by people way down. Generally, people appreciate receiving the information and are not overly confused if there's actually specific information about the location for the incident in the message. how the wireless infrastructure generally is targeting messages today, and this is changing. There are changes in the regulation, and the work is ongoing to figure out how to do that between the wireless carriers today, and FEMA is participating in that. But today, generally, the geo-targeting is based on how the local network is configured and supported and where those cell towers are. This is only important, as I mentioned, probably for the next several years, and will be changing. The best practice that we can recommend today is to generally draw your alert area a bit larger than your actual area that you're intending it to go, so that you can ensure that there is a cell tower, the base of a cell tower within your polygon or within your alert area that you're describing. Today, some areas of the network and some network configurations will only broadcast the message from a cell tower that is within the geographic area description that is sent with the message. As you can see on the left side of this diagram, towers that have their base outside of the area may not broadcast that alert, which can leave gaps in that polygon of the area that you want alerted, gaps with phones in there that are inside the area listening to a tower outside the area that would not get the message. Some network areas are configured right now today to look at their coverage from a cell tower, and if the coverage of that cell tower overlaps with the geographic alert area, then they also broadcast it from that cell tower. That's what results in cellular phones outside of the specific area receiving messages, but generally making sure that all the cell phones that are within that area do receive the alert. The potential for, especially in rural areas or areas where cell towers cover much larger swaths of ground, if the network is configured, as I mentioned, to only broadcast from towers that are inside of the alert area, then it's important to make sure that you've encompassed a cell tower base, the location of that cell tower within the alert area message description. Changes to wireless. Craig covered these. I'm going to talk specifically a little bit more technical detail on these. Some technical notes. So the ones that are circled in this red outline bubble there, and particularly the top three, where the increase in message length from 90 characters to a maximum of 360 characters, the new alert category called public safety messages, Spanish language and Spanish language support in particular will require changes to the interfaces of those vendor tools that I mentioned. So the vendor tools will have to include a place for you to enter 360 characters, and in addition to the English text for your message, a spot to enter Spanish language. The system and the cell phones and the FEMA iPods will not be doing translation of your English message into Spanish. So to deliver Spanish messages to the affected population, the alert originator will have to include the Spanish translation. The way the system will work is that both the English message and the Spanish message will be broadcast to all cell phones. The cell phones will receive those messages. Depending on the primary language that's selected by the user for the phone will make a choice to either display the Spanish text of the wireless emergency alert or display the English text. If a phone is set to Spanish and no Spanish text is provided, then the phone will alert and display the English text. In addition, the wireless emergency test code, they're still in development on exactly how that will be implemented. I don't think that will require a change to the interface, but by far and large, including the links, some interfaces, some vendor tool interfaces do not provide an opportunity to include a link that is not displayed but may be clickable within the message. These are things that we'll be reaching out to the vendor community as soon as we have some more details in place on the interfaces and what that cap message will need to contain as we relay it to the wireless carriers. So these changes, and then of course the other big change is what I'll call geofencing. Later on, by the end of 2019, some network areas will be able to target only the phones within the geographic alert area with no more than a 1/10 of a mile overshoot. And then in addition, we'll preserve that longer 360 character message on the phone for up to 24 hours for users that have hit the dismiss button to be able to relook at the contents of that message as they are directed to respond or take shelter during an emergency. I'd caution that this transition, the capability across all phones and all network areas will take some time. While we may have areas operating by the end of 2019, you can expect that there's going to be phones and potentially network areas across the country that won't support all of these capabilities for probably a few years to come. So that will be a phased-in process, and we will continue to communicate with you about that. Quickly on NOAA, I mentioned this a couple times before that we have some connection issues right now between IPAWS and NOAA. Originally, the IPAWS-NOAA connection allowed a local authority to send a message through IPAWS into the NOAA networks that would distribute and then broadcast that message from local NOAA weather radios for reception by people who had NOAA weather radios. Beginning in about, I think it was in 2013. So unfortunately, due to some of the message handling that happens within the NOAA networks, the message identifier is sometimes changed or modified as it moves through the system. That resulted in emergency alert system boxes, EAS devices, and in fact some other NOAA dissemination systems not realizing that the two messages that they had received via two avenues to be the same message, and it ended up being duplicate messages, NOAA weather messages that were broadcast from radio and television, and in some cases from NOAA dissemination systems. So that is a system that that is a piece that we are working with the National Weather Service and NOAA to figure out and bring back online soon as the ability to send non-weather emergency messages from NOAA weather radios is very important, especially in the larger and rural areas of this country. In addition, today NOAA is not distributing any of their weather products to the EAS feed. What that means is that radio and television stations cannot receive NOAA weather warnings and statements through the IPAWS EAS connection. The only place for them to receive National Weather Service warnings and alerts is in that over-the-air relay or from their local weather forecast and NOAA weather transmitters. We're hoping to rectify that as soon as possible. Very quickly on the IPAWS, what we have is called the All Hazards Information Feed. This is the most emerging and evolving current capability within IPAWS. It is a place for companies that have signed a memorandum of agreement to us with FEMA to be able to consume alerts that are intended for the public that pass through the IPAWS system. Effectively, what we do is publish any alert, again, that has been directed by an authority to be sent to the public onto a feed, an internet feed. This is completely voluntary and it's a developing capability. Today, on this screen is a list of a few of the companies that have completed that memorandum of agreement, although at the time I'm not aware of any specific emergency message delivery examples via most of these services. But it is our intent to continue to partner with the internet connected services, applications, websites, etc., and to enable them to deliver relevant emergency alerts and warning messages to their customers when they're using their services. So how does an authority get online with IPAWS and be able to leverage those IPAWS services? We like to say generally that it's a simple four-step process. Generally it is, but I would encourage some upfront coordination and research first. Key thing is to check in, especially for states, to check with your local state point of contact for alerting. You can do kind of that step as well as the first couple steps concurrently, and we can assist you with with the contact information for that state authority if you send us an email at that ipaws@fema.dhs.gov email address. Remember that address and keep that one in your address books at all times. That's kind of the key. There are multiple people within our office watching that. That is the fastest way to get a response from our office rather than emailing an individual. So generally your steps are you're going to need to have a tool that interoperates with iPAWS. You can be looking for that tool. We can provide you some hints and tips on what various tools, vendor tools are available, and any that we know of that are in use around your area or with your state. If you email us that, to complete an MOA, a memorandum of agreement, you'll first email us and ask us for the application for that. We do some email exchange with information and then send you a document back for signature. That document is returned then to FEMA for signature by our security officer and our chief information officer. That piece gets you a user profile initiated within the system, and we then issue the digital certificate that you will have to load into the tool that you use to interface with iPAWS. But you do not have the authority or the ability to send alerts directly through to the public via iPAWS until you complete this next application, which is called a public alerting application. On this application, you identify what types of messages you're going to send, your specific geographic area that you have jurisdiction over, and which systems that you intend to use in iPAWS to send them. That is a form that we coordinate, or we ask that you coordinate with your state contact if you're a local authority, that they will ensure that you're fitting within the local policies and plans for your state before they sign that and send that into the iPAWS office. Once we receive that form, we in essence finish building your profile and turn the switches on that allow any message that's sent to you that fits your profile to go straight through to radio, television, and cell phones. I want to caution, in those yellow boxes down there, those certificates and that MOA expire after 3 years. It's important that you check the expiration date on your digital certificate. You can either check that with your tool vendor, or if you have access to your cert within your tool, or you can email us and we can keep you up to date on that. We generally reach out to agencies within 6 months of when your certificate is going to expire, but it's not uncommon for us to find emails that have moved on, and we have sometimes a challenge in contacting someone at that agency. So please ensure that the iPAWS office has up-to-date contact information for your agency, especially as those that are responsible or managing the vendor tool and the iPAWS access at your local area change. So some best practices. I mentioned those program initiatives up front that we really started considering in 2017 before some very public incidents, to include Hawaii and some others. But certainly those helped us gain some attention, and we are leveraging that to really, within FEMA and external to FEMA, develop and disseminate and get back to the folks who actually have their fingers on the buttons to send emergency alerts, some best practices and recommendations so that they can be as effective as possible at sending alerts to their local public. First up to think about is to document the policy and plans for alerting within your jurisdiction. It's important to think about who, the roles that will be responsible, and the roles for both deciding that a message should be sent and deciding what that message should say, and identifying the positions that will make all of that happen within your agency. When it is time to send, before there's an emergency that you need to get a message out to the public. You want to work on guidelines and templates, use cases or concepts of operation for sending messages, like what you would expect to send. It's helpful to look at and think about potential hazards that are likely to occur in your area that you would then need to send emergency messaging in to the public in order to help them with their safety and their well-being. From that, you can develop message templates and checklists for how to send those messages and how to develop those messages, who to check for with the authority to send before it is pushed out, and then the procedures for actually keying into your software the message that you intend to send, and hitting the send button and getting the responses back from the iPause system that tell you the results of where your message is going. It's also important to coordinate with your neighboring jurisdictions. Your message most assuredly will be received by people in your neighboring jurisdictions, and providing a method and thinking about the ways that you will notify authorities in the next town over when you have an incident going on that you are sending emergency messaging to the public about is a key. And then again, let your public know. Share this information for the public that you've developed plans, your intents, and how you plan to use them, and then review those policy and plans on a periodic basis. Next is to then train based on those policies, plans, and SOPs, standard operating procedures that you've developed. Practice using those checklists. Exercise the policies. This is a point where you may have to go back and make changes the whole way up to the policy level to effectively mesh with what you found as you've worked through practice and testing. And again, let your public know. Let the public know, involve them potentially in your training. Let them know that you're training and practicing, and then periodically involve them in a test or an exercise where a live message actually goes to them. So that they can be familiar with what the messages look like and sound like as they are broadcast to them on radio and television and through their cell phones, and solicit their feedback. I mentioned all of those tools. Your training and your SOPs, your standard operating procedures, will be specific to the particular alert and warning vendor tool that you use. On the screen here is an example of screenshots from 4 pretty large vendors in the field out there. Many of these, but not all of the iPause compatible tools, support the ability for you to use all of the capabilities with an iPause. One of the critical ones is that we have an iPause lab with an offline version of all of the production or live environment capabilities that you can access, that you can actually practice with from your tool and from your office. 3 of these vendors that are shown on the screenshots have support directly within their tool that you were provided with their subscription, that allow you to point the tool at the iPause lab and practice, and then point back to the live environment. The one tool that is displayed up here actually requires that you reach out to them, and through scheduling and a special appointment, they can support you testing with the iPause lab. The iPause lab is literally an offline version replica of all the capabilities and services that are in the live iPause, except that the iPause lab, the alerts are only delivered to devices that live within our lab, which is about 45 minutes south of Washington, D.C. To use the lab, it requires that you have a completely separate digital certificate that you have to obtain from the iPause office, and would then need to be supported and loaded into your tool that will allow you to send messages to the iPause lab and look at their results. Contact us again. Use that ipause@fema.dhs.gov email with any questions on this, and we can hook you up with a test certificate, and we can also provide you details about which tools supported or how you can work with a vendor in your area to get access to that lab. Our lab, we support real-time either visits to the lab or virtual webinars, or in person. We support testing and training sessions at the lab, and of course assistance during exercises. The other piece that we have hosted out of that lab is a completely separate website that you can, after you've sent alerts into the lab, into the iPause lab, you can go to this website, and using your user ID or your COG ID appended to the back of that web address there, you can look at alerts up to 24 hours on this web page that were sent to the lab from your tool. That tool, what this tool does is give you the ability to look at the status and what the actual content would be that came out on cell phones and on radio and TV, know weather radio when we get them back online, and also what's published to the public feed. It's a very good tool to use for both practice and troubleshooting. while you're working through those templates and deciding what you may send for relevant hazards in your area, you can practice against this tool without needing to schedule any time with lab personnel or require any assistance from lab personnel. You can see what your 90 characters comes through. When you enter a certain 90 character or more message within your tool, how does that display on a cell phone, and what text, where you insert text within your tool, what text actually shows up on a TV station that is crawling the EAS message across the screen when it's activated. So we are finding a lot of people that tend to use this from a monthly or a weekly tool, a validation of their SOPs and their users. So when their users come in for that week, they may have a day where they practice with the lab to ensure that they walk through their SOPs and practice and actually get a result back. And again, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at our email address for any hints and tips on using that. The IPAWS Lab also is being used for testing and training, both virtually and also and in person, and also for development of, say, those policies and SOPs that I mentioned earlier. Lab personnel can help with reviewing those SOPs, especially the IPAWS specific content and how you're referring to wireless emergency alerts and EAS within those procedures and plans. We support EAS troubleshooting, and we can also provide real-time exercise planning and execution, and also monitoring of the networks, in particular radio and television capture, audio capture and screen capture, if you were doing a live test within your local area. Live testing. Let me talk about that. Last but not least, sending an alert warning test message to the public as a training and education test and exercise is very valuable. You want to not do this too often, and live testing really is the only way that you're going to know how your local networks, your local wireless networks disseminate wireless emergency alerts, and also how your local radio and television and cable stations respond when you activate EAS. This definitely requires upfront planning and coordination, and a waiver from the FCC that allows the local carriers and EAS providers to support your test. Key to this, and we are getting more involved with assisting different agencies across the country in doing this, is that check in with us first. We can provide you some guidance and some templates for how to make a test plan, assist you with reviewing that test plan or writing that test plan. We can help out with that. What are the expectations and coordination of a request to the FCC for a waiver to conduct the test? And then we really want to help you practice sending that message into the lab environment before you go live and send that to the people that live in your area. We're seeing very good results in telling the public about those test details up front, in particular telling them exactly what that message will say, where you're planning to send it, and then telling them how radio and television as well as their cell phones are expected to behave when they get that test. As Greg mentioned, there are going to be phones within the area that do not get it for a variety of reasons, but by far and large you'll find that probably the majority of phones will get it. They may not get it all at the same time. We can give you some talking points to assist with that as you're communicating to the public. And then of course send a test message and then ask for feedback. Ask folks where they were when they got it, how they felt when they got it, and then eventually report back to the public generally on how the test went and anything that you are working towards to be ready to protect them and to send them information and help them protect themselves when an emergency happens in your area. And that was all that I brought to talk about today. And Greg, I understand our email account is up and running. So if you've sent us a message.
So we've got a few minutes. Let me grab a chair and we can do some questions. Thank you, everybody, for your patience with that email glitch, but I think we were able to get all of the emails that were sent. So anybody who I think wanted to ask us something has had the opportunity do so. So I just handed a pile to Wade. I've had a chance to look through the ones that I think are relevant to the FCC. So let me answer a couple of folks. First off, Phil Rice from the state of Florida, SWIC. Phil, here are some dates. Phil asked about when the enhancements for WEA would be approved, particularly the carrier count increase and hyperlink or tiny URL capabilities, and an Amber Alert authority asked that in Florida. I'll just run through these very quickly for you, Phil. The URL capability for the major carriers is in place right now. Okay, so since November 1st of last year, the majors plus U.S. Cellular have been required to do the URLs. Now, for your smaller regional carriers, that compliance date is May 1st, 2019. Okay, and just to zip through the rest of these that are relevant, what we're looking at is May 1st of 2019 is going to be the expanded character limit, the state and local WEA testing that we mentioned, and the ability of WEA to support Spanish language alerts. November 30th, 2019 is the geofencing that matches the polygon and what we call alert preservation. So if you get the alert and you're driving, then you want to pull over and you want to pull up the alert, that you'll be able to do so. So those are the main WEA deadlines. Let me just knock through a couple of these. Mike Gerber from the National Weather Service asked what we meant by the comment period. And Mike, those orders were released last week. They have not hit the Federal Register yet. The specific comment and reply dates will be listed when the documents are published in the Federal Register, and that would be some period after that. But some of them are what we call collections, where we're asking for information from third parties, and those have to go through a separate review by the Office of Management and Budget before they're approved. So we will fire off a public notice when we have our actual comment dates for the order. Gary Tim in Wisconsin asks about triggered cap polling. Very briefly, what triggered cap polling is that since there is better information in an IPAWS-based alert than there is in a daisy chain-based alert, it's been suggested to the Commission that EAS participants be allowed to modify their EAS equipment such that upon receipt of a daisy chain alert, that they would immediately be able to ping the IPAWS website to see if there was a more robust and more detailed cap-based alert. And what the Commission noted in its Blue Alert order was that there's nothing to bar folks from doing that now except for the presidential alert and national tests. But for all other EAS alerts that are voluntary, there's nothing to bar the folks from doing that right now. Our understanding is that the capability of EAS equipment to actually be upgraded to do that, to upload the software to do that, is either in place currently or will be in place at various dates throughout the summer. We're putting together dates on that right now to be able to have that information available for folks.
If I might
add
in, just a caution, Gary, recall also, and for all you, the EAS folks that are out there, today the National Weather Service is not distributing weather warnings through the IPAWS EAS feed. So the only alerts that would be available that way would be things that come from the users, local authorities and state authorities that are, and of course National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, that are disseminating their alerts through the IPAWS EAS feed today.
Thanks. That's really, really quite important. Thank you very much, Wade. And then we also got a question from Ed Arkey about the ETRS registration dates. And Ed, let me just flip through and come up with these again for you. Form 1 needs to be completed on or before August 27th. Okay, and that's the one that has all of your background information in it. Form 2, which is the day of report. Yeah, I got it, I sent it, etc. That is due 11:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, September 20th. And then the Form 3, which has the details about how you, as an EAS participant, were able to receive or disseminate the test, is due on or before November 5th, 2018. So I'm going to turn this over to Wade because I thought there were a few sort of FEMA-specific questions, and we got 6 minutes. So.
Yes, thank you. I'm responding here to a question first up from Letitia Van Vuren in Knox County. Question about how long does it typically take from the time you start the application process to become a user, if you want to leverage those iPause services. And there's some variance in this, but typically we should have it complete within 60 days, and many times we can hit a 30-day timeline window. Recall also that part of that actually coming online with that ability to send is that we will need to receive your certificate that you completed the iPause training, and then of course the signatures that may be required on your side, in addition to getting it pushed through the FEMA Office of the Chief Information Officer and Office of Chief Cybersecurity Officer. So, but generally, and please don't ever hesitate to ping us at that email address that you see there if you have any questions about the status of your application. We have a new customer service branch stood up in iPause in the last year that their first focus is to make sure that we're processing those applications, and it is not uncommon for us to receive on average 5 applications a week, even though we're past 1,000 users in most of the population to date. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us on a question of that. There's also a question here about polygons. When you have the alert area that is defined within the message by the message sender, if it must include a cell tower, and how would that work on a campus or an area, a college campus is the question, or another area that's that the cellular service is provided by a distributed antenna system, or instead of a macro cellular tower. And I'd say that I'm not sure. That would be a question that really is best solved by either with a local test that we can help you set up, where you are actually sending a test message to see how that network happens within your area, or if you actually can find a local cellular network technician within your area that knows the details on how that actual network is distributing the wireless emergency message through the network when they broadcast it. I have another question here from, again, this is also from Ed Arkey, on can an educational institution, say a college, become a registered user of iPause to be able to send alerts in the area? That answer is tentatively yes, in coordination with the local authorities and the state authorities in your area. In fact, there actually are, most of them are big state connected institutions, but I believe there are, I want to say 14 or 16 colleges, universities that are registered users in coordination approved by their state coordinating official today. So that is a possibility. I see, Ed, that you're in Pennsylvania. If you send us an email at that address, we can connect you to, we can serve you the contact information for both the local authorities and the state authority that are managing who gets access to iPause within Pennsylvania. Here's a question from Scott Dakers on where in the system, this question is generally you're asking about, is there a separate notification, or are school officials monitoring alerts on their cell phones? Again, this is an individual area or local policy. Alerts will be delivered to, if there is an alert broadcast from a cell tower that is covering that school, it will go to all the phones in that school that are not opted out. During the test that 20 agencies in cooperation around the Washington, D.C. area here did earlier this year, they informed all the schools that this test would be happening a couple days beforehand so that teachers could be ready when a majority of phones went off within their area.
Wade, I hate to cut in, but we're about to run out of time, folks. I thank you all very, very much. I wish we had been able to get to all the questions. Please, if you have FEMA questions, send them to ipause@fema.dhs.gov. But also, please continue to send all questions to pld@fcc.gov, and we'll get back to everybody. But thank you all very, very much for this, for participating in today's webinar.